Hey everybody, so it's been a little while. It's good to see you all. I'm going to try to do this lecture before my daughter wakes up from her nap. I'm also doing it sitting on a bouncy yoga ball because I'm now 33 weeks pregnant and I need to help my posture, I guess, and so this is my new trick. So that's why I'm rolling around. Anyway, I miss you guys, and I hope that you're doing well. I'm excited to read your essays or your two paragraphs that you put together. I'm really hopeful that they're really strong because I only asked you to do two, so I hope they're your strongest ones that you feel most confident in. And yeah, so I'm going to try to start reading those this week and then give you guys some feedback on that. So you should have a good idea of what you got on it. It is worth 100 points. So if you don't get what you're hoping for, I'm probably going to offer you some sort of chance for revision, but I haven't thought that through yet. Let's get to the lecture. I'm going to switch this up. We're going to be talking about the war in the Pacific and the dropping of the atomic bomb today. And then next week, so this is going to be the focus, kind of since we did Japanese internment camps last time, I thought we could do this. And then next week, we're going to focus on the U.S., like kind of at home during the war. So it might feel like we're kind of going back a little bit in time, but just to give you guys an idea, it's all just stuff that's happening during the war, and that's going to be our focus then at home for the next 2 weeks. So let's dive into this. You can continue your notes on the same paper that you've been working on your notes so far. So you guys can see the Battle of Midway is where we're going to start talking. The Battle of Midway takes place in 1942. So at this point in time, the United States has been in the war for a couple of years, and it has not been going well. Ever since the dropping of the attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States was losing to Japan. Japan took the Philippines from America. They were kind of like taking all of the islands, kind of creating their Pacific Empire. And the United States was bracing for attack on the West Coast. That's why if you guys go do that Land's End walk to the Golden Gate Bridge, you guys can actually see like where they had machine guns positioned. And I mean, the West Coast was ready for an attack from Japan because Japan was honestly... they were beating us. And the reason I'm starting here at the Battle of Midway is because this is sort of like the midway point. Not quite chronologically because there's more time after this battle than there was before, but it's sort of the turning point for the United States. There's also a movie that just came out called Midway that shows this in way cooler ways than I could. But the pretty much allies, there were Americans that actually intercepted news of this attack on Midway. We were unsure of where Japan was going to attack us, and the question was, where should we position our aircraft carriers? So much of the war in the Pacific was centered around aircraft carriers because you're able to deploy a bunch of airplanes from that position so you can fight both in the air and on sea and on land if you get to the island. So the United States was kind of taking a gamble a little bit, trying to figure out where Japan was going to attack, and we found some kind of encrypted some intelligence, figured out that or decrypted, some intelligence, and figured out that Japan was going to be attacking Midway. And so we planned for this attack, but even though we figured it out that it was at Midway, it wasn't even a guarantee. So the United States Navy kind of takes a gamble and we wait at Midway. It's kind of weird to talk about this without sort of showing you, but we kind of hid our aircraft carriers hid them in plain sight. So you sort of hid them on the horizon. So since the Japanese didn't know that we were expecting them, they expected to come and attack Midway, which is a really important airstrip that the United States had control of. So the United States had their aircraft carriers positioned just so when Japan thought that they were going to arrive there, it would be too late and our planes would already be launched. The reason this battle was so significant is because 322 Japanese planes were bombed before they took off. You guys can see here on aircraft carriers, these guys in the back cannot take off until these guys here are able to get off the plane. So if you can surprise attack an aircraft carrier, it's not as lethal because you need time for all these planes to take off. It was after Midway that the United States begins their island hopping campaign, which was their strategy to not attack the islands that Japan was really had fortified in these couple of years, and instead attack the ones where Japan maybe didn't have as much of a stronghold. Iwo Jima was one of these places that kind of actually broke, because I'm not going to talk to you guys about all of the different islands and island battles that took place. There were quite a few actually that I'm going to kind of skip over, like the Battle of the Coral Sea and things like that were really important strategic battles that the United States won. But Iwo Jima is one of the most sort of like famous battles in this island hopping campaign. It was a crucial base that they knew that they needed to take down in order to reach Japan and in order to keep Japan from reinforcing themselves from this island. So there were 21,000 Japanese soldiers actually entrenched on the island, and the United States still fought to take that island over. This is a famous statue that was made of the kind of battle. So there's 5 soldiers here, and there's actually 11 hands on the flag. And somebody said that he messed up, and the artist said that it was sort of like the hand of God that sort of helped get them through this. If you guys notice the numbers, there were 21,000 Japanese soldiers on the island and only 200 survived. The reason there were such small numbers is because of the Japanese belief in not surrendering and kind of the dishonor behind that. And we talked about that a little bit in our last lecture. Okinawa was then sort of like the last obstacle until the United States was able to make it to Japan. So the United States was up against 1,000 kamikaze pilots, 110,000 Japanese. That's actually ended up being the casualty numbers. So they were up against kamikaze pilots. Japan knew that this was a crucial base. You guys can see just how loaded the waters were. It was an absolutely intense battle that took place. In the end, again, the casualties, there were 110,000 Japanese casualties and 7,600 Americans. So the numbers are, again, so skewed there because of this, the recognition on Japan's part that they could not surrender and they could not give up even when odds did not look like they were in their favor, because kind of the dishonor behind that, and they also recognized how important Okinawa was. So that kind of brought us to then this final point in the war in the Pacific, which is, okay, where do we go from here? We've kind of broken up these sort of strongholds, pushed Japan all the way back to their home base, pushed them back to Japan. And so where do we go from here? And that's sort of the question that the United States is asking themselves. They're wanting to end this war in the Pacific, and they're trying to figure out what the best way to do that is. Meanwhile, the United States had been working on the Manhattan Project, which was a highly, highly secretive project that was being developed in the United States. There were over 600,000 workers that were working on this project, but few people knew what its purpose actually was. J. Robert Oppenheimer was the scientist that led most of the development in this Manhattan Project, which was the development of atomic weapons. So there were all kinds of scientists, people that were working on this, and actually President Truman didn't even know, because President Truman becomes president when FDR dies. So FDR was president in his third term, and he died during that term. And so Truman becomes president. He was vice president. So the information he receives when he becomes president, he's told about this project. So, I mean, even top officials in the government did not know what this project, or even that this project existed. The United States successfully launches their first test of the atomic weapon, or the atomic bomb, and it's a successful test. So they tested it, and it was successful. And so less than 10 days after that, Truman got onto the radio and warned the Japanese of prompt and utter destruction from the sky. Now, I want you to think about for a second, if you were fighting a war with somebody and somebody said to you, "We are going to destroy you from the sky," you would probably think to yourself, "Oh, they're going to try to bomb us." But nobody had any understanding of what, not even the United States, even though they had tested it, they tested it in the desert. They didn't even know the kind of destruction that would bring on a city. And so less than 10 days after the successful test, he warns the Japanese and says, now is your chance to surrender. But you guys already know how the Japanese feel about surrender. And so they decide, there's radio silence from Japan. They don't surrender. Why would you? It's someone threatening you, your enemy threatening you during war. It's what you expect. And so they don't surrender. And so Truman makes the decision to drop the atomic bomb. So August 6th, a B-29 named the Enola Gay dropped a little boy over Hiroshima. This is actual picture of little boy. You guys can see it looks different from Fat Man. They're two nicknames of the bombs because of just the atomic makeup of the bombs. But so little boy is dropped over Hiroshima on August 6th. It's made with plutonium, and the devastation, it was enormous, instantaneous. You guys are going to look at the death rates, and this is just the initial impact, not even to mention the kind of unknowns that we didn't even know about with radiation and things like that came as a result of using these atomic weapons. So this happens August 6th. Truman gets on the radio again, connects with Japan, asks, "Do you surrender?" Radio silence from Japan. And so he says, "We're going to continue." And so 3 days later, he drops Fat Man on Nagasaki. And it was after that point that Japan, finally, the emperor actually implored his people and actually makes the decision to surrender to the United States, officially ending World War II, because we had already Hitler had already fallen, and there was already VE Day, Victory in Europe, and this was sort of like this sort of lingering part of the war that the United States was still fighting. So when Japan surrenders, that officially ends the war. So this is just interesting information. Harry Truman said after the dropping of the bomb, he said, "I regarded it as a military weapon. I never had any doubt that it should be used." So he remained very confident, even with the incredible destruction that was left by it. I mean, I know we talked about this a little bit last year, but the devastation. And you'll actually get a chance to read some stories of people, but people that were just instantly just kind of disappeared because of the heat wave and the energy wave that kind of came from the atomic bomb. And people that really felt like and described that it was like their skin was dripping off of their bodies. It was absolutely miserable and terrible. But he says there's no question. This was a military weapon and we had to use it. J. Robert Oppenheimer, kind of realizing the impact and seriousness of what he had created, said, which I always feel like is kind of ominous, he says, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." So I think he realized, like, the importance of what he had created, but also realizing, like, what the impact and legacy was. He realized, now that I've created this, like, this is the ultimate machine of death, and this can destroy entire worlds. And so I kind of like recognizing the significance of it. And then lastly, I wanted to just talk to you guys about sort of the American rationale behind it. This is a photograph that was taken, and the pilot of the Enola Gay actually signed this photograph. But this is Okinawa after the dropping of the atomic bomb. So you guys can see it's just completely leveled. But the United States had some serious rationale for why they decided to drop this bomb. So you guys can see here, here's Okinawa in the Pacific. But here's Japan. I want you guys to think about how hard Japan fought for Okinawa, for Iwo Jima, for Guadalcanal, for all of these islands that were not even their home. And now, when it came down to it, the United States had been fighting this war with Japan for years, and they knew Japan is not going to surrender their home. If they fought this hard for these other islands, they committed suicide rather than surrender, they will never give up their home. And they saw the war dragging on for years and years and years, and they just felt like it's going to cost millions of American soldiers' lives. It's going to cost so much money, billions, trillions of dollars, to continue fighting this war that's all the way across the Pacific. This is going to be a very expensive and very drawn out long war to fight, and they wanted to avoid that. And so they, that was probably like the biggest piece of rationale. The other thing is, dropping this bomb, it kind of gave them this sort of intimidation factor. They were the only people in the world with nuclear capability. And this was major intimidation factor for Stalin, who had his huge, massive Red Army, and it was a very fragile alliance with the United States at this point in time because he had initially allied with Hitler, if you guys remember from last year, and only became our ally once Hitler attacked. So there was the intimidation factor. And then others said, you know what, this is kind of like revenge because Japan surprise attacked us at Pearl Harbor. They pulled us in the first place. So this is sort of revenge. On the other side of things, you had people say, well, these are innocent civilians, not soldiers that are being killed. There's other ways to go around it. And so what I actually want you guys to do is I want you guys to look at those two perspectives of sort of the perspective from the United States side and the perspective from Japan's side. Really looking at this question of how should the dropping of the atomic bomb be remembered? Should it be remembered as this like grand kind of like important monumental decision that was essential for America? Or should it be remembered as, a tragedy? Should it be remembered as triumph? And that's what I want you guys to do in your activity that you're going to be working on. And then we're going to have a discussion kind of looking at some images like we did with the Great Depression. So that is the plan. And I successfully did the lecture before my daughter woke up from her nap, which is great news. And please, you guys, if you ever want to chat or check in with me or talk, please just send me a text on Remind, and I can set something up on Zoom, and we can check in and chat or do whatever. So, miss you guys. Hope you're doing well.